welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the 14th Salem Lit Fest. I'm Carolyn, a member of the Lit Fest committee, which is made up of writers, publishing professionals, Athenaeum and Salem Public Library staff, and enthusiastic readers who work year-round to bring you the Salem Literary Festival. Excuse me. Before we begin today's program, we'd like to respectfully acknowledge that this land is Namkeek, or fishing place, where generations of indigenous peoples lived and passed through for centuries. From the village upon the Namkeek River, now known as the North River, to Sachem-Nanapashamet's fortification, now known as Castle Hill, the people of the Namkeek farmed, fished, traded, raised families, discovered and invented, created art, and above all else, honored the lands upon which you stand today. We acknowledge that this indigenous land is also the Massachusetts tribe who continue to honor and hold this land into the present. I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's session, A Telling Story, Familiar Tales Retold. We'll begin with an author-to-author conversation with Laurie, Lico, Albanese, and Jenna, Blum. Then we'll have a quick break to reset the stage for our author and folklorist GennaRose Nethercott's visual retelling of her recent novel, Thistlefoot. I'll give you quick bios on Laurie and Jenna. Laurie Albanese has published fiction, poetry, journalism, travel writing, creative nonfiction, and memoir. Her books include Hester, Stolen Beauty, Blue Suburbia, Almost a Memoir, Linnell by the Sea, and The Miracles of Prado, co-written with art historian Laura Morowitz. Each of her books have been chosen by the IndieBound list of independent booksellers. Other awards include a Hadassah Brandeis Institute Research Grant, New Jersey State Council for the Arts Fellowship in Fiction Writing, and many others. Laurie is married to a publishing executive and mother to two. Jenna Blum, a longtime friend of the Lit Fest, is the New York Times and international best-selling author of the novels Those Who Save Us, The Storm Chasers, and The Lost Family. Her most recent book is a memoir, Woodrow on the Bench, about her black lab Woodrow and what he taught her. Jenna is one of Oprah's top 30 women writers and co-founder and CEO of the pioneering online author platform, A Mighty Blaze. Jenna has taught writing workshops at Grub Street for over 20 years. She has interviewed Holocaust survivors for Steven Spielberg's Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, and is a professional public speaker traveling nationally and internationally to speak about her work. Jenna is based in downtown Boston, where she hikes, teaches, and does the bidding of her black lab, Henry Higgins. So, welcome. We're looking forward to your conversation.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Oh, you need the mic.
It's on, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, it is on. I'm so happy. So during the pandemic, we all did a lot of Zooming, which was great. And I was so sad because I didn't have my boyfriend hot mic. Like, I'm so happy to be back with an actual microphone at the actual Salem Lit Fest, even though we all went online for all of those years. And it was such a privilege to be part of it all those years. It's so good to be back in person. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for hosting us. I'm really excited to be here with Laurie.
And I'm really excited to be here with you.
Yes.
And thank you, Carolyn, and thank you to the Athenaeum and the school for having us here.
The Athenaeum is amazing. So, also I would like everybody to notice that I dressed like a book tonight.
Yeah, yes, you did. You
the rose
matched.
colors, yes. This is like my little level up. Well, the end, that's my effort here. So, okay, so Laurie, let's talk about Hester.
Okay.
if we may. I love this book so much. I would ask how many of you have read it, and you can raise your hands, but we can't see you, but we assume that many of you have read it. For those of you who have not yet read it, I ask you this not to book shame you, but so we know that Laurie can answer this question with impunity, which is, what is Hester about? Tell us about Hester.
So it looks like about half the people have read it, and the other half of you probably recognize the name Hester from the Scarlet Letter and Hester Prynne, right? So I will not talk to you like this, I promise. So this book, Jenna and audience, is Hester Prynne finally has her say. When I was thinking about what I wanted to work on after my last book, I was thinking about, I wanted to write an American story, and I wanted to write something that was sort of foundational in American literature. And I had just done my MFA, and I had researched women's historical fiction, and arrived at this knowledge that The Scarlet Letter was our original historical novel in America, and Hester Prynne is our original feminist heroine. So I asked myself, what if there was a real Hester Prynne? Or what if there was a woman who inspired Nathaniel Hawthorne to create Hester Prynne? And that is sort of what this book is about. It's a foundation story for The Scarlet Letter.
I love that, so that women can actually take their place in the foundation of literature in this.
Yeah, well, that's exactly.
Pantheon.
Yeah, that's what I like to write, is I like to write about women who were previously in the margins, sort of taking them out of the margins and giving them a voice. So this is an imagined story about that. It's an imagined story because it's set in 1829 in Salem, and Nathaniel Hawthorne is a character. He was really living in Salem then. He was a young man, and but I invented a lover for him, and that's. Yeah, I wanted her to finally have her say, because when you're reading The Scarlet Letter, if you've read The Scarlet Letter, many of us have read it in high school, of course, when you read it, you realize it's narrated really by a man. Even though Hester Prynne is the main character, you're never really in her head. She never really gets to speak to you. So the whole story turns on Hester and her actions and her decisions, but it's all narrated through really a Soto or proto-Hawthorne voice, because he's kind of the narrator. If you remember from the introduction, he tells you, I work in the custom house. I guess I don't need to tell people in Salem about Nathaniel Hawthorne, but yeah.
You might. I bet there's like at least one person out there who's like, I did read The Scarlet Letter in high school and I forget all about it. I still remember The Scarlet Letter. I remember the shaming of Hester Prynne. There was an awful movie with Demi Moore.
Yes, yeah.
Which I'm sure you got to watch for research.
I did not let myself watch that.
Okay, that's probably just as well.
But I watched Easy A after I
that would do it.
Which was fun, because I wanted to see what other people have done culturally, and also I watched Easy A seriously because I was thinking about and was asked to talk about how is The Scarlet Letter still relevant today. And Easy A is a really good example of, just the idea of shaming. Women are still shamed for exhibiting too much passion. We all know what's going on with women's reproductive rights today. That's sort of, it harkens back to Hawthorne's original story, really.
Yeah, I think this is an original American story, from The Scarlet Letter to the Me Too movement to the Barbie movie in America. Ferrera's very impassioned speech about how difficult it is to be a woman in this society. Like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Can you tell us a little bit about your heroine, Isabel, and how, unlike in The Scarlet Letter, in which Hester is a catalyst but has no agency, Isabel has her own agency and you inhabit her so fully. Can you talk a little bit about how you invented her or channeled her? Like, what did it feel like to write her?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So Isabel Gamble is the heroine. And if you remember The Scarlet Letter, actually Hester Prynne had come from England. And her husband had sent her ahead, and when he finally gets to Boston, she's already pregnant and had her baby. She's actually already had her baby. So for me, when I first started researching this book, I thought that maybe I would have Nathaniel Hawthorne have a love affair with a peer of his. And I don't know if you're familiar with Margaret Fuller, the early American feminist, but there has been, Margaret Fuller wrote a book about called Women in the 19th Century. She was very much a part of the Emerson, Hawthorne, Thoreau circle. And she ended up having a baby out of wedlock when she was in Italy. And she actually died in a boat wreck, or allegedly died, as my next novel is going to ask that question. Yeah. And there has been, the scholars have thought that maybe Hawthorne was inspired by Margaret Fuller's life and fate to create Hester Prynne. So for about a year and a half, I was researching Margaret Fuller and making her become Hawthorne's lover. But what happened was, I wrote so much, I read so much, I loved the two characters, but, well, I didn't love Hawthorne, but I loved Margaret. But I just couldn't make them get in bed together, to be honest with you. And when you're writing about real people, you really have to be able to believe. There is a sense of responsibility. It has to have been possible, and I just didn't believe that. So then I put that aside, and I just went back and I thought, what kind of woman would I want her to be? And I wanted her to be a passionate woman, but I realized she was not an intellectual. She was probably from more of a working class family, which is more of my background, so I was more comfortable giving her that background. And I chose Scotland because I wanted something very magical. And frankly, for those Outlander fans in the audience, I just felt that there's so much magic in Scotland, and there are all the little wee folks and the fairies, and there's, it's a very colorful place. So I made her a Scottish woman, and then I made her a seamstress and embroiderer, because just so that she was just like Hester Prynne, an amazing seamstress and embroiderer. So she comes to Salem in 1829 with her ne'er-do-well husband, and things ensue.
I love the ne'er-do-well husband so much. You're just thinking, don't marry that man. She's
right.
Like, okay, I'm going to marry the man. But
yeah.
She didn't have that many choices, Isabel, before she left.
Yeah, she didn't. No, she didn't. And women didn't, right? Women really didn't have a lot of choices.
Can you talk a little bit about her personality? Like, it sounds like, unlike Margaret, who you might have had admiration for, and who was a real person, like Isabel, somebody you felt maybe more comfortable with? I'm extrapolating this from what
I did.
You just said, but like, tell us, like, if she were your friend sitting up here having like coffee with us, like, what would she be like?
Well, you often get asked, what are the 3 words you'd use to describe your heroine, right? So she's very creative, she's very intuitive, and she's very resourceful. So she's somebody who, if you're in a pickle, you probably want Isabel on your side and nearby, Yeah, and she's a person who, because of the year that she's living, and most of the women in the book are trying to have agency, and they're struggling because the agency wasn't given to women in that time. You had to sort of fight for it. And when I was creating her, I knew I wanted to make her an embroiderer, just like Hester Prynne. And I wanted her, you always have to have your heroine have a really great ambition, right? So I thought I really wanted her to want to have a dress shop of her own. And I thought, well, that's kind of small from 21st century standards. But when I did the research, I realized that was a great ambition, and not very many women were able to become business owners on their own. And so it was an almost unimaginable thing for her to want to be a professional needle worker, to want to design embroidery patterns, to really want to make her living with her needle. Should we talk about synesthesia?
I was going to ask that, so I wish you would talk about synesthesia.
Yeah.
I will tell you guys, I have synesthesia.
Oh,
so
I didn't know that.
You didn't?
Well, did we talk about it that time once?
Maybe. I don't know. We talked to each other backstage during the interview at one point, and we did tarot card reading. We can talk about that too.
We did that on Zoom.
We did it on
Zoom, right.
We did. But I have synesthesia, which is a condition in which your senses are kind of cross-patched, I guess is the way I explain it, so that there are different forms of it. And I have the form in which letters have colors.
Oh, so does Isabel.
Numbers, and she does too.
Oh,
and the funny thing about synesthetes is if you say like H, which to me is mustard yellow, if I say this to another synesthete, they'll be like, no, it isn't, it's green. And you can like fight to the death about that because Hester is mustard yellow, blue, black, green, blue, red. to me. Like I've been like, why didn't they do this? You know? So I've always seen the colors that they occupy. This is sort of like a parlor game for me. For Isabel, it's a big deal. And do you want to talk about why?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, why did I give her synesthesia? Because, for me, synesthesia is at the root of her creativity. Like maybe you feel it is for you too, right? I have a question about your synesthesia. Like, when did you realize not everyone had it?
I think this is a really good question. Maybe grade school, probably. I don't know. And other people have much more pronounced forms of it in which sounds have colors or
like Kandinsky.
Sounds have tastes. Yeah, like Kandinsky. It's a fascinating thing. But what I didn't realize is that how few people have synesthesia, and it wasn't until I was in my late 40s that I realized my sister has it.
What?
And she sees colors differently than I do.
But she sees letters in color?
But she sees letters in colors, numbers in colors. Like to me, the calendar has shapes.
I've spoken to someone who has that. Do you see it like up here, sort of visually? You see it in a circle?
Yeah.
Does anyone in the audience have synesthesia? Anyone just realized this second that you have synesthesia? That actually happened once in a panel.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I think, I don't know if it actually inspires my creativity, but it definitely informs it. I had a character in my last full-length novel, The Lost Family, who had synesthesia, and it drove the copy editors crazy because I was like, well, this letter is blue, but if it's next to a green letter, it has a different color, and they were like, never mind, we're just going to do whatever you say. But it is, it's something that both helps and hinders me in a way. Like if I choose a character name, it has to be the right colors, and each color has an emotion, and then that has to go with the character's personality. I mean, it's a mess in there. But it's very colorful.
But so that what happened when I realized. So this is how I realized I would give her synesthesia. Is I went back because when I was writing the book, I was working in conversation with the Scarlet Letter. So I went and I looked at how I thought about this question. Hester Prynne is essentially cast out, canceled, shamed. But all these people in town are coming to her and paying her to do embroidery for them. And I thought what her embroidery must have been way beyond, because everybody knew how to sew then, right? In the Hester Prynne's time and also in my Isabel's time. Every woman knew how to sew, and most women could embroider as well. So why did people go to her even though she was an outcast? And I thought her work must have been so exceptionally spectacular, and then I did read some of the descriptions, and that's how Hawthorne described it. So I thought, well, maybe has visions, but I didn't really want to do that, So then I knew I'd worked with a girl who saw numbers and letters. She saw numbers in color and with gender. So like 7 was a pink. I don't know, I'm going to get it wrong, but like 7 was a pink girl or something, right? And 4 was a boy. So I tried it out. I tried out giving her the colors. And I brought it to my writing group, and they said it worked. And then I realized that for Isabel, this is a gift that's also a curse. It's a curse that's also a gift. And then when I realized that, I was very interested in that as a topic. As a creative person, many times we know that the people we love, or for ourselves, the thing that you love most about them can become the thing that's most difficult about them or about yourself. I love this person because they're really, really passionate, except I hate that person when they're really, really passionate and angry, right? So your gift that's your curse that is your gift. And I feel like as a creative person, we know sometimes creativity is a burden, right? It's like, it's a heavy lift. So I gave that to her, and the other thing that happened was I realized, just like you just said, Jenna, your sister has synesthesia. Did any of your relatives earlier on have it?
I have no idea. It's just something that's like you have fingers.
Yeah.
But you're not like, oh, I'm double jointed until you meet somebody else who thinks it's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can pick up things with your toes and people are like, oh my God, what do you do? So
Yeah.
I think I was in a writing workshop and I was talking about the letters having colors and whatever. I was teaching the workshop and people were looking at me like, I want my money back. What are you talking about? Like, writers are supposed to be weird, get over it,
Right.
But yeah, I know, like, it's just, I think, a part of who we are. My whole family is creatives, also lots of alcoholics. Like, I'm sure they were like,
the curse that is a gift, the gift that is a curse.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think so.
So when I did my research, I realized that synesthesia does run in families. There is a genetic component, although I'm not a scientist at all. So what I did is, because I had made Isabel Scottish, and because Nathaniel Hawthorne's family history is connected to the witch trials, right? Nathaniel Hawthorne's great-great-grandfather, John Hathorne, right, was a magistrate in the witch trials and who never recanted. He was one of the only people who never recanted, even after the court was abolished, even after in '93 everybody was let loose who had been imprisoned. He never recanted, and so Nathaniel Hawthorne carried that, as I'm sure most people in Salem know. He carried it as a great guilt, as a great burden, and it continued through his family. And I'm interested actually, because I know, but not firsthand, I know from research and reading, that many of the people who were involved on either side of the witch trials in Salem stayed, because it was very hard to leave. In that time, you had to have a church or a minister accept you into a new community. So the people who were descended from the accused and the people who were descended from the accusers lived side by side. And actually in Hawthorne's family, there were people in his ancestry who married one who was from one side, accused and accuser, and that's his second novel. That's In the House of Seven Gables, right? So, which is a long way of saying, I wanted to give that same thing to Nathaniel Hawthorne and to Isabel. And since she had come from Scotland, and I knew there had been a lot of witch trials and, you know, witchcraft accusations, I gave Isabel an ancestress who is a real person named Isabel Gowdy, who was accused of witchcraft and found to be guilty. And I made her descended from this woman, and I gave them the lineage of seeing A as a scarlet letter. So that all kind of happened organically as I worked on the book, after I worked on it for 2 years, you know.
It's such an interesting sort of braid throughout the story that Isabel is told by her mom when she's a child, and she doesn't know that her habit of seeing colors is A, unusual, and B, something to be feared, but her mom says.
Right. Don't tell anyone about your colors, because they'll think you're a witch.
Right, so then she moves to Salem, where there were witch trials like fairly recently, like, you know, a couple of centuries previous.
Right.
And has to hide her colors, even though they are the thing that enable her to make a living.
Yeah.
And the thing that she really wants to do, which is such a bind.
Yeah, and that gave her the connection to the scarlet, the scarlet A, because she said A is a red letter, A is red, B is blue, C is yellow. How does that ring for you?
Mm-mm.
No.
It's funny, if I had written the scarlet letter, it would have been called the navy blue letter, which does not have the same ring to it at all.
Yeah.
So it's just as well that Hawthorne wrote that and not me.
Yeah.
That is it.
Yeah. Actually, I was at a cocktail party once, and they were auctioning off a copy of my book, and a woman said, wait, you wrote the scarlet letter? One of my friends said it. She said, mm-hmm.
I did, and then I wrote this companion piece to it also.
You can buy both of them.
Very busy, right? It's a bundle.
Right.
That's really funny. I wonder, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot since I have been reading Hester, and also there are a lot of amazing stories that, as you said, sort of excavate women's voices from the classics. We were talking before you guys came in about, for instance, like 1,000 Acres, which is the Jane Smiley retelling of King Lear, or Circe, which is Madeline Miller's retelling, or what was I thinking of? It will come to me in the shower tomorrow.
Are you thinking women? Because I can think
of Thank you.
Oh, well, Natalie Haynes writes about Greek literature. I'm going to look at my notes here.
Demon Copperhead.
Demon Copperhead, but that's a male. Oh, Alice Hoffman has a new book, The Invisible Hour, which is also inspired by the Scarlet Letter, and in fact, she was under contract for her book when I was out trying to sell my book. But then my book was done first. So in the way things work in the world, now there are companions out there together. And I read The Invisible Hour, and I liked it. Yeah, I thought it was, and it has time travel in it. And Nathaniel Hawthorne has a lover in it. So, and she's a redhead, just like Isabel.
Whoa.
So, I know.
So it's kind of like she took your idea
No.
and married it with Outlander.
Without knowing.
Okay. Right, with some hair dyes.
Well, actually, my character has red hair.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah, she does have red hair.
That's true.
It's a little bit, I think it's too tempting, you know, to make a character who has a little bit of witchy stuff to be a redhead. So I didn't resist.
I remember you telling me when we talked about Hester before, when it had just come out, that if I had been alive then, because I have synesthesia and I'm a writer, I would have been doubly cursed here and thought of as a witch, like a creative. And I'm thinking about that topic of taking women's voices out of the story in which it was originally told, like that story Basket, and putting it into its own format. And I've been thinking about sort of like appropriation, which is something that we talk about all the time. And I'm thinking about Hawthorne, sorry Hawthorne, I know this is your town, but sort of appropriating Hester's story to make into his own book. In the same way that in Hester, Hawthorne takes Isabel's story and makes her into his muse and then embroiders his own story around her. How do you feel about helping sort of rescue, I guess that's not quite the right word, but to sort of rescue a woman's story from a story that a man told?
Well,
I
I
feel like the
like
men
the way you asked
appropriated
that.
the
It's like
story,
you're in my camp, the way you asked
I'm
that
totally
story.
in the camp.
But-
Sorry, when I said the A word, that's the other scarlet A word right now is appropriation. And
Yeah.
I feel like the appropriation is sometimes like, we live a life, all writers do this, but don't quote me, but like, there's a lived experience that we then borrow to embroider into fiction, and Hawthorne in this book borrows Hester's experience, or Isabel's experience, to make into this classic.
Yes.
And now you're giving her back her own voice.
Or you could look at it the other way, which is that I appropriated Hawthorne's story, which is also true, right? So so it's like a retelling of a retelling of a retelling, and I'm reimagining it.
Yeah.
So in terms of giving women their voices back, when I started working on this book, I went back and read Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own, and that was actually given as a convocation speech in, I think, 1923 to an all-women's college at graduation. And what she says in there is, women, go out and tell your stories because men have written history and they've pretty much marginalized us. And she has a little story in there where she says, imagine if Shakespeare had a sister who wrote poetry. He may have, and you would never know. And so when I was thinking about writing a woman's point of view from a classic, I really felt that I'd been given permission by having read that command from Virginia Woolf. And not only does the woman come out of the margins of history in this book, but also when I was realizing, well, who else was in the margins of history? There's also some African American characters in the book, and I was looking at the history, I was reading the history, and there was actually a free African American community here in Salem. But if you read a book or a short story by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and I know there are English teachers here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you'd really never think there was a person of color anywhere. Well, no, there's actually some Native Americans in the background with Chillingsworth in Scarlet Letter, but there were no African Americans in those stories, and so I put them in the story too. I wanted to have whoever had been marginalized and taken out of the narrative. I wanted to give them a voice. And I've talked to writers who think I don't think that way at all about my writing. I don't think I have I don't have a particular cause that I'm thinking of. But for me, it's just a starting point, right? It's fun for me, and I feel like I'm doing something that it is an answer to the Me Too movement, And so Nathaniel Hawthorne, and I'll say this last thing, I did a lot of research. I interviewed historians, two historians particularly in Salem, Donna Seeger, who is at Salem State University, and Beth Bowers, who's at the Salem Historical Society, and one of them, if not both of them, said to me, don't make Nathaniel Hawthorne too nice because he was really not a nice guy. So I took that, and I ran with it, I would just say.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think he is a tiny bit of a weenie.
Well, in my creation, he is Dimsdale from the Scarlet Letter who never steps up, right? And it was perfect to be writing it during this was my pandemic / Me Too book, And so it was a perfect time to be writing it and thinking, who else is there in history who needs to sort of be taken down a notch? And I thought some of these guys from this time period in American history and American letters and literature, surely they have a backstory, right? And I just wanted to give him one. He was a secretive guy with a secretive past, and he was haunted, and those things are all really a matter of record. His own words, he says he was a haunted guy. And, one thing we knew about Hawthorne is that he lived in Salem for 10 years, and he said all he ever did was sit in his room learning how to write. But he went out alone, walking for hours every night. And when I do a slide presentation, I show his picture, his portrait, because at one point he was extremely handsome. And I thought, this young, handsome guy walking around every night by himself, they really think he's just walking the streets for 4 hours every night? Maybe he was doing something more interesting.
It's like the guy who's going out for cigarettes for 4 hours.
Right, exactly. Where are you going?
That's really funny. On the one hand, I'm just like, oh, I don't believe that. On the other hand, I'm like, you're describing every writer ever who's like, I sit in a room alone, and then I go out walking for a long time.
Well, that's true.
That's basically a writer.
That's true.
And I will say that even though he's not somebody who is a man of great action and backbone, he is an empathic sort of, or he's somebody you can empathize with.
As a writer,
and also just as somebody who's haunted and has a conscience about his own family's history, especially living here.
Yeah.
And feeling like it is a sort of a stain on his family lineage to have hanged people.
Yeah, and on the other hand, I don't feel judgmental about him for having taken this experience he had in his life and turned it into a novel, which of course I invented. So, but even in my invented world, I did not feel judgmental of him. I felt I wasn't trying to pass judgment on him for that. I was thinking, this is what writers do. You experience something, you turn it into art. And so both Hawthorne and Isabel are creative people, and that's like from the first line of the book where she said, the first page where she says, both of us were trying to be free, he with his notebooks and I with my needle. And so I was really interested in the creative journeys that people go on.
Right, every writer is an appropriator in that way.
Yeah.
Right, like you appropriate from just things around you that you see. Like
your dog. Your dog's
I appropriated from my dead dog.
Oh, this book is so beautiful. I listened to Woodrow on the Bench as I drove up here today, and it is a really great, of course you should buy the book, but the audio is really good. And she even has the woman who does the book has your speech patterns.
Yeah,
did she talk to you first?
She did. So this is every once in a while you get to interview your own audio people, right? So they'll send you like 6 people and say, choose one of these people. And I chose the woman who sounded almost exactly like me. And she was so great. She had a brown lab. And so she called me before she did the audio, and she was like, please tell me what Woodrow's voice sounded like, because the dog in the book has a voice because he had a voice. And I said, well, Woodrow sounded like a combination of Barack Obama and George Clooney. And like there was this little silence, and she's like, that's a high bar. But I'll try, and so I was giving her sort of instruction and saying, he would say things like, look, Mamu, which was my name, like the dog is starving, the dog needs food, there is something very amiss. And feed the dog, you lazy woman. And she did such a good job.
She does a great job embodying the dog's voice, saying Mamu. And what do you call him? Kooks.
Kooks, yeah. Or the George Clooney of dogs, which is what other people called him.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening to that.
I actually have a black lab as well, but there's no there's a cat in the book. There's no dog in the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. I want to talk about so many things about Hester, the cover, the audio, but I want to stick with the book a little bit more. Can you tell us a little bit about the Black experience in the book, like the Black/slave/freed slave storyline, because that was unexpected to me in the same way that the synesthesia was, and I was very glad, as you said, to see people visible who I did not know were part of the community, especially in the original Scarlet Letter telling.
So Mercy is really, I loved creating the character of Mercy, and she was complicated for me to write because you're talking about appropriation, and we all know it's very hard now to write about people who don't have your same background and experience. So when I wrote a very early scene, I had Isabel go to Salem, go to this cottage, and this woman, Mercy, and her 2 children showed up on the page. And at that time, I was in a writing group with Alice Elliott Dark, who I'm sort of still in a writing group with, who's an amazing writer who wrote Fellowship Point, set in Maine. And she said, she read the scene and she said, oh, so Mercy's going to be an important character. And I said, oh, tell me more, Alice. Like, how do you see that happening? So once I put her on the page, she kind of came into being on her own. And I knew I wanted her to be very important to Isabel. And it was important not to write a white savior story. It was just as important to not create a character of color who was sort of magical with potions. And I had to really work very hard. And I happen to live in a super integrated town, so I have friends who I can ask, you know, is this offensive? Does this feel right? Does this sound right? And I ended up making Mercy, some of my friends were like, Mercy would never have been that friendly to Isabel. So I made her not so friendly. So they had to earn, they both had to earn their friendships. And, you know, the book is set in 1829, and this is just at the beginning of the Underground Railroad. And so I know the Underground Railroad passed through Essex County, it passed through here. And so I just did the research, and what you find when you start doing the research is how much we still don't know, or how much we're just finding out about, you know, the connection to slavery and the Underground Railroad and where the wealth came from in a lot of places in New England, and everybody knows this story, but I wanted to at least nod to it in the book, and once I found it, it was interesting to me. So, and they were fun characters to write.
I love Mercy because she's kind of stern.
Yeah.
Like, she is the person who you move in next door and you're like, hey, how are you? I'm just like setting up my garden, and she's like, no.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, we can be friends, and she's like,
Can we though?
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of have to prove yourself. I'm glad you said that. I live in a building in downtown Boston that was built in 1860, and it has like a Narnia closet, like my apartment does, that it goes back and back and back and back and back. And the building's original staircase, and I feel like it must have been Underground Railroad at some point. Like sometimes they go to get a dress out of my closet, and I'm like, I feel you.
Oh.
I feel you in here. You know, like I feel like there are some sort of spirits or sort of residual feeling there. Do you, being in Salem, feel your book? Do you like get feelings about like people in the book being here, or the real people being here? Like, is it sort of haunted in that way for you?
I actually, I wouldn't so much say that, but I would say when I drove through town, and I was like, we drove into town, I was like, there's the Commons, and you know, the house that's part of the Peabody Essex Museum that has a steel fence around it. I was like, oh look, that's that person's house, and that's that person's house. And I do definitely feel Hawthorne here, and sometimes I feel like, okay, don't give me that shade, you know, because because I kind of, you know, took your story, so.
Don't go past his house.
Yeah.
After dark.
Right. Exactly. But it's a great town because the town has preserved the history so well. And there's so much more to the town than the witch stuff. And I really, you know, wanted to honor that as well. You know,
I'm always curious about that when I come here. I'm like, do people walk through the town and be like, oh, that happened over here where I'm buying like something from Trader Joe's?
Right. Yeah.
You sort of feel the residual.
Yeah.
Echoes of history. So I was wondering if that brought your book alive for you. Can you tell us a little bit about the most surprising part of your research for Hester?
Oh, so what was most surprising to me is how wealthy Salem had been from a very long time. So I did the maritime history, and the shipping trade was here. So before 1812, as far as my understanding is, Salem was home, before the War of 1812 and the embargo and everything, Salem was home to some of the richest men in the world. And of course we do mean men. And then I found out about the embargo that stopped the trade, and that kind of made Salem not quite as wealthy. So there was that, and then, but there was also the realization that how were the cod kings so rich? And the cod king, because we know that expression, the cod king, they were rich because they were drying cod and selling it for the Middle Passage and sending it down to the sugar plantations, because there was a lot of connection between people in Salem and the ownership of sugar plantations down in the Caribbean. So does anyone have an objection or anything to say about that?
Yeah, I kind of am like, I'm really
I
fascinated
think we should do
by-
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe, because we've been talking a lot about your town,
Yeah.
and I would love to get people's feedback and questions for Laurie about Salem and about all things writing. We answer all questions. We also write fiction, so if we don't know the answers, we make them up.
Yeah, exactly.
You can ask us anything, right? This is like Reddit now. It's an AMA. You can ask us anything.
Oh, perfect.
Whoops, sorry,
Yes, hi.
I do some like.
So I absolutely loved your book. I haven't had the pleasure of reading yours yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
You'll love it.
And you covered so much, so I don't so much have a question about the novel itself because you gave us such a breadth of background about it, which I really appreciated. I think it's fascinating. But as someone who is also aspiring to eventually put a book into the world and has yet to get through a first draft, I'm just wondering for any fellow writers if you too have any recommendations or suggestions. I know being a part of a writing group has been a big help to you. I have a small one. I try to have a practice, but some days it's harder than others. So how do you make being a professional writer happen? Because it's the dream. And I'm
But you're a teacher, so you help other people realize the dream as well, right? And you've written your own historical novels. I mean, the only thing I would say is just keep going. You know, honest to God, you have to be very stubborn if you want to be a writer. Wouldn't you say, and it's in your book, which I heard today, where you say you have a quote over your desk, that Winston Churchill, right? Never give up, never give up, never give up. And I have a quote that I had on the wall of my office when my office was on my 3rd floor, and it was from Goethe, and it just said, do not hurry, do not rest. And that's what I think. And so you would think that I'm now writing my, X numbered book, that it would be easy, but the truth of the matter is I'm working on draft 3 of a book that isn't quite all there yet. And so you just have to keep going and write your full draft before you try to take it out in the world. Because once you've written your full draft, then you can go back and say, like, what did I really mean to say? And you can put all the good stuff that you didn't know you were going to write, you can hint at it now in the beginning so that it goes through the whole book, right? I'm sure you have a great answer too.
Yeah, well, actually, you gave my great answer, which is the Winston Churchill quote, and I usually just say, never give up, never give up. No, don't be sorry. It's great to be quoted, even if it was actually Churchill who was being quoted. But I think it's true. I think the stubbornness is so essential. Like, I tell people you have to have, 3 things to be a writer, and one is, like, you have to love words. Like, you have to have a facility with words. You have to read. Like, I remember when I was teaching at BU, and my students would be like, we were taking writing classes, and they're like, I watch so much TV. I'm like, TV is great. Like, I'm the daughter of a broadcast news journalist. Also, you have to read books. But so a facility with language is good, and then really you have to be so stubborn that you're almost pugilistic about it, because the career involves a lot of rejection and a lot of this will sound so depressing. It's like disappointment, but I mean, like, yeah, there's just a lot that you have to push through, and so you have to have a core belief that what you're writing is really, really important. Like, what you're saying is important, and you have to be in love with it. And if you're not in love with it, don't do it. Like, there are other pleasant things you can do while you're waiting for the love to refill your cup. So I think love, belief, facility.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
Hi, I've read these, I'm looking forward to it, but I have read Those Who Save Us in Stolen Beauty, so I want to thank you for both of those books. I'm also a historical fiction writer myself, and I wonder if you could talk, and they were both very helpful to me because I write during World War II as well. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how your views of writing historical fiction have evolved. You touched on it a little bit in terms of how careful we have to be now and how nuanced we have to be in terms of the characters we write. But I wonder over the years if your views have changed in terms of how much research is enough research, how much imagination is too much imagination.
That's a really good, really big question. How my views have changed. Well, I loved Those Who Save Us, and you did a lot of amazing research in that book, right? I find that I over-research, and that the truth of the matter is, I don't think you can over-research, not really, because I feel like what you have to really know to write a book in a certain time period is sort of what the social fabric of the people and the time were, right? So when I was writing, Stolen Beauty takes place in Vienna and Austria, both during Fantasiac Vienna, which is turn of the century, like 1900 to 1918, and then again during World War II. And so I had to know what people thought about and cared about, and like what the secrets were in Vienna, like that actually in Vienna there was a syphilis epidemic, for example. Like just things like that. So I read a lot of stuff. I read primary research. Like when I was writing Hester, I went to the New York Public Library, and for some reason, I don't know if it was me or the machine, but I had to look at each page, take a picture of it, and print it to read the Salem Gazette. So I read the weekly newspaper, which appears, I mentioned in the book, and that's why I knew when Nathaniel Hawthorne goes into the shop, he goes into the dry goods shop, I knew that there would be buttons, I knew that they would be in drawers, I knew how the fabric would be stacked up, I knew what was coming in on the ships. So it was a ridiculous amount of research, and sometimes, because I'm not a historian, and I want you to answer the question too, but for me, I'm a sort of messy researcher, right? And I feel like that's fine. Sometimes I forget I knew something, and then I write it in the book, and then I look it up, and I'm like, whoa, I knew that, and then I'll be like, oh right, I read that. So I think just to inform yourself in the gestalt, the entirety, and walking the streets, coming to Salem and walking the streets was a real gift. Yeah. So what do you think?
I think that's right. I think what you see in books is usually the tip of the iceberg, like Hemingway's tip of the iceberg in terms of the research that the author has done. And there's usually an initial draft that the author writes that is so research heavy because we're in love with everything that we find out and we throw it all in the draft. And then the characters are saying, as you know, Bob, like their buttons that were in this shop are made of scrimshaw, which is actually from the jaw of the whale. And then you're like, okay, I need to go smooth that over in the second and third drafts.
Exactly.
Right? So, and I think one of the most painful things as a historical fiction author is when you have research you love and you can't jam it into the book somewhere. So it has to go like on your website or something. It ends up on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
And then you get to talk about it at readings when somebody says, what kind of research do you do? But so I should have asked you like what fact you couldn't put in the book that you really loved. But I think that like the most important thing for me is the gestalt is such a great word for it, the social fabric, and also the tactile fabric of people's lives, which is also what Laurie was talking about. Like there's a great detail about how Isabel plays with these scrimshaw buttons that she gets. I do, and they sound like chicken bones in a cup, like little chicken bones in a cup, and they make her cat come and like curl against her leg. And the sort of the tactility of that and the five senses replication of experience is what makes historical fiction come alive. So when I'm researching historical fiction, I will look, I have a timeline on my wall, like I have everything on my wall like a crazy person. But my room gets wallpapered with shit. But there's a historical timeline, there's like Wikipedia stuff, there's encyclopedia stuff, there's whatever, and then there are like images and image boards, and I listen to the music, and I try in a sort of what one reader called method research way to recreate the experience that the characters are going through. So for Those Who Save Us, half of which, that's my first novel, half of which is set in a bakery. I baked everything that appears in that novel. So that I would know what the flour felt like on my hands and like how to make a bread. For the third book I wrote, it has a restaurant in it, and I created and kitchen tested the whole menu of the restaurant, which also was total procrastination. It took me a whole summer. I'm like, I'm researching. I can't start writing yet. But it did really inform the way that I could write within the characters' skins about things I didn't know about physically, which was great. And we lack only a time machine, right? So,
Which we kind of have with Google in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's the most fun part.
Thanks for that question.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for being here. This is great. Have either of you had to go to the mat with editors to fight over stuff that you just did not want to see on the cutting room floor? And also, what about titles? My son is in the process of having, and I'm always curious people's experience with the title that you feel your book is, and then the discussion when that title is not necessarily what other people in charge think your book should be.
Such a great question. I feel like there are lots of writers here, or like writer adjacent. I don't know. I think no and yes. So I have not gone to the mat with my editors about the text of the book, because that sort of is a sacrosanct kind of thing. They're like, this is, your name is on this, it's your story. So, I mean, every once in a while we have a conversation about things, but if I feel really strongly about something, it generally goes in the book or it is omitted from the book. And my titles are usually awful. Like, I'm terrible with titles, and my titles are all default, and nobody has ever changed them, which is shocking to me. Like Those Who Save Us, which my editor at HMH at the point said was a terrible title, because it was very vowely and had no proper noun in it, not like Hester, right? So it's hard to remember Those Who Save Us. It's true. It was taken from a phrase in the book. And so I'll tell the story and then I'll turn the mic over. But she said, I need you to think of an alternate title. And I'm like, I'm so bad with alternate titles. So I had a title contest among my friends, and I sent out an email that said, if you guys can think of another title for this, I'll give you $20 and a bottle of scotch. And what quickly happened is that it turned into a spoof contest. Like, the book is about a German woman who becomes the mistress of an SS officer to save herself and her little daughter during World War II. And so the top titles that I then turned into my editor were Someone's in the Kitchen with Anna, who was a baker. The Bread Also Rises. And then my number one awful title, which came from my mom, which will tell you everything, which was Gone with the Reich. And so I turned these in to my editor, and she was like, we'll just keep the title the way it is, darling child. And so that's how my books get their titles. Like, I just kind of like toss a title on. I think I go to the mat on covers and I never win. Ever. So
it's really interesting. That's a really interesting question, because my answer is also no. I mean, I've never gone to the mat with an editor, because they're sort of in charge, and they're also very respectful. Yeah. So they're not going to say like, oh, actually, you know what I had to do? When they copy edited this book, they put the serial comma back in, and I'm not a serial comma. Yeah, the Oxford comma. You call it the Harvard comma? We can have an argument about that.
We're gonna have a little argument.
They put the Oxford comma back in, and I was like, what is this? And it was actually a rather big deal, because it was the second round of copy edits, so it was the second round of proofs, and my editor, so there I was like, my editor was very annoyed. And she hadn't copy edited it. It had gone to an outside copy editor. And I did really say, yes, please take out all those commas. And she was annoyed, and it cost money, and she was like, do not make any more changes in the next round, just this. Basically, you listen to your editor. They're really good about knowing what makes a good story. And I really value, maybe because I have a background as a journalist, I really value the editing process. I like to be told, do this, write a scene here, take that scene out, that's not working. I usually like, you're right, it's not working. I did go to the mat for the cover. This cover, I went to the mat, they turned in it something that was a red-headed woman on a beach looking out to the shore. And I don't know, that was my first novel that I hated, and I could do nothing about. It was a woman on the beach looking out, and I hated it then. Why would you give it back to me now, 4 novels later? Which I didn't exactly say. And then I was like, twisty embroidery, please. So they came back with something that was really, really pretty, and it was white, and they kept coming back with a couple of different versions. Like, there would be 3 different things that were 3 different concepts. And when I didn't like the second version, the only one I liked, my editor didn't like. I was practically crying, not on the phone, but at home. To my agent, I was like, how am I going to tell them I don't like? Because they send it to you and they say, we love this cover. We think this is perfect, and so does our sales team. We hope you like it too. And you're like, oh, no.
What was it? What was the
It was very pretty. It looked like an embroidery magazine cover. It looked like an embroidery instruction book. It was white with very pretty Hester embroidered, just pretty. And this one has sort of a twisty thing going on. And I was like, no, black. And actually I have a friend who's a book designer, and she did some mock-ups for me, like in 2 seconds flat. And that kind of also annoyed my editor, because she was like, I don't want other people coming in and doing mock-up covers for us. But I got the cover I loved. So that was hard.
It is beautiful. I have to say that 2 things editors despise is when you crowdsource your cover, which we all do.
Yeah.
And also because a lot of writers are visual thinkers, so we know exactly what we want our covers to look like. And we're like, here's what I want my cover to look like. When I did Woodrow, this is a cover that was like this very unusual, like right out of the gate, like exactly what I wanted. My other books, not so much. And I was like, I wanted to look like Tuesdays with Maury, but with all the lessons coming from a dog, because that's what the book is. But otherwise, like I crowdsource all of my covers, and also author photos, where you're like, which author photo should I use? And they're like, but my friend Emily really wants this one. And they're just like, that's not what's going to sell the book, however.
I'm going to have to get a new author photo soon, because my author photo is pretty old. You don't want to show up and be like, oh, you look nothing like your author photo, what the hell?
Right? And if I've been face tuning too much, just let me know.
Would you like this back? Thank you. I think we're being gone.
Gone. Well, thank you so much. We could sit here and listen all night, but some of us want to go to sleep someday. So.
We want to hear GennaRose.
And we want to see GennaRose Nethercott. So, thank you, ladies.
Thank you very much.
And please be patient while we set the stage for GennaRose Nethercott's portion of the program. Thank you. Hi everybody, welcome back. GennaRose Nethercott is a writer and folklorist. Her debut novel, Thistlefoot, followed her first book, which was The Lumberjack's Dove, and that book was selected by Louise Gluck as a winner of the National Poetry Series. Whether authoring novels, poems, ballads, or even fold-up paper cootie catchers, her projects are all rooted in myth and what our stories reveal about who we are. She tours widely, performs strange tales, and sometimes with puppets in tow, helps create the podcast Lore. She lives in the woodlands of Vermont beside an old cemetery.
I was going to bring a book of mine to hold up and show you, but I forgot it. So if anyone has one out there and want to show, there we go. So I wrote that book with my brain. That's called Thistlefoot. Someone's holding it up there in the back. And there it is. I just had like an emotional moment out in the lobby because I realized that the booksellers there have an advanced copy of my new book, but they haven't yet sent me a copy of the new book. So I just saw my new book for the first time. So I'm going to bring that right now, yeah. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Forget that book. It doesn't even exist yet. We're here to talk about this book. This is Thistlefoot, my debut novel. I'm just curious, how many of you have read Thistlefoot already? Okay, a good handful. For those of you who have not read it yet, or who just lied about reading it to look cooler, Thistlefoot is the story of two contemporary Jewish American siblings, Isaac and Bellatine Yaga. And they've been estranged for many years. Isaac is a street performer and honestly a bit of a con man, and his sister Bellatine is a woodworker. She's super practical. They really couldn't be more different. But one day, they learn that they are to receive a mysterious inheritance. The end. I do that joke every time, and everyone hates it every time, but like, I'm not gonna stop. You can't make me stop. No, that is not the end of the story. Isaac and Bellatine essentially let curiosity get the best of them, and they agree to meet up and see what is inside this giant shipping crate that has arrived for them. All that they know about it is it had belonged to a twice great-grandmother they never met who lived off in Russia, what is now Ukraine. And so they go, they crack it open, and they are amazed to discover that this inheritance is no typical heirloom, but is actually a sentient house lofted up on a pair of chicken legs. Wow is right. Now there's someone who could probably do a better job of introducing this house to you than I ever could, and that is the house itself. So I'm going to let the house, which they call Thistlefoot, do just that.
I was a house. I was a baby chick, cracked loose from an egg. It may be difficult to imagine a strong walled, thick-roofed structure like me as a hatchling, but it's true. That's how the story goes anyway, so that is how I will tell it. A hen sat on her roost in the dimming light. This hen had no name, no lineage to speak of, no story of her own save for this one I am telling you now. The farm where she lived was in a Russian shtetl called GennaRose in what is now Ukraine. It was near spring. The hen heard a goat bray on the edge of the farmland. She shook rain from her feathers. As she sunk into the haze-sweet musk, a song came to her, though she, being a hen, did not know what a song was. The words, I'm sorry to say, have been lost to time. You may write your own lyrics if you like. The hen felt a laying coming on, so she bedded down deep into the hay, and she let an egg loose into the world. Thus, I began. Crack! And what a beginning. Can you imagine what the hen must have thought when she saw me? First, my tiny golden feet cracking through the shell. All as it should be, but then the rest of me. Chimney and gate, small wooden doors, windows blue with glass. The hen, my mother, she spooked too easily. She looked at me, and she didn't see a bird at all. Ran squawking from the nest, they say. So frightened, she ran right out into the night and straight into the town butcher, Rad Liser's knife. Oh, don't pity me for losing my mother. I'm not sentimental. She wasn't my real mother. My heart mother, anyway. She was only an ordinary bite of poultry. This is one story of my origins, but it is not the only one. People talk. How they talk. What I can tell you for certain is that I was born already running. I don't intend to stop. Now, the hen was right, of course, to doubt my legitimacy as her child. I've never been a very good bird. I am, however, an exemplary house. I differ from regular houses in two primary ways. One, I do not have a foundation. Instead of a foundation, I have two chicken legs, strong and restless as a slingshot. Two, I do not reside in a single static location. I loathe sitting still. If you try to make me sit still, I'll kill you. I'm going to tell you what came before. I'll recite it like a folk tale, a memory. A true memory is too harsh, full of sharp edges. Things happen that we cannot speak about aloud. Rememberings are prickly, like blackberry briar in winter with no leaves to soften them. But the worst thing about memory, the deadliest, most brutal part, a memory can be forgotten. But a folk tale, well, a folk tale can never be forgotten because it wriggles and it rearranges until it sits neatly on the heart. It adapts to the mouth of every teller, and it shifts to fit the shape of each listener's ear. And so, the folk tale survives, assimilates, and with it, so survives the past. Lie-da-da, lie-da-da, lie-da-da,
So, Isaac and Bellatine, they open this house, box, gift, contraption, and they decide to take it on the road with a traveling show. The two of them had grown up in a puppeteering family, and they figure, hey, we've got this thing, let's take it on the road and make a quick buck. And I like to say that this book, it's a fantasy novel, but maybe the most fantastical part of it is using a puppet show as a get-rich-quick scheme. I've lived it, folks. Now, I want to ask the crowd, how many of you are familiar with the folklore of Baba Yaga? Or Baba Yaga? I always say Baba Yaga because I think Baba Yaga sounds like saying croissant instead of croissant. It was just sort of on principle. So, for those of you unfamiliar, who just lied about being familiar to look cooler, Baba Yaga is a figure from Eastern European Slavic folklore. She's this sort of crone witch character who famously in the old stories lives in a house on chicken legs. And she's a character that I've always really been drawn to, in large part because of her volatility. She's someone who, depending on the tale, will either give you a candle that will solve all your problems, or maybe she'll just eat your baby. Really depends on her mood that day. You gotta respect that. So in the novel Thistlefoot, turns out Isaac and Bellatine's twice great-grandmother, who they received this inheritance from, is none other than folklore's Baba Yaga. My Baba Yaga, however, is a little bit different than the traditional Baba Yaga. The way I sort of sum it up most succinctly, I guess, is that I stole her for the Jews. So she's Jewish now. She's not Jewish in the traditional stories. And she is living in the year 1919 in the months leading up to a pogrom, which were organized massacres against the Jewish people perpetrated by the Russian government. So, long story short, the book primarily follows Isaac and Bellatine, but every once in a while it dips into the past, and we get to see Baba Yaga living sort of in the wake of World War I before this horrific event happens to her small shtetl or small town. And we hear these stories from no narrator other than the house Thistlefoot itself, who you just met. And Thistlefoot likes to tell stories as if they are a folktale. It makes them softer, and it makes them easier, and it makes them stranger. So what I'm going to do for you today is I'm going to perform a couple of those folktales that Thistlefoot tells about Baba Yaga, and have a little puppetry accompaniment along with it. So I do want to say before I perform this puppet show again, is that I didn't build these puppets. I feel I need to say that because if I was simultaneously writing like a 450-page book and building all these puppets, I'd have too many skills, and we can't have that. So I'll tell you about my collaborators after this next piece. Also, I formally apologize to Jenna Blum, who's terrified of puppets, and I'm sorry. She's like ready to fucking bolt. She's like, I'm ready to go. There is not a puppet in this one that will scare you. It's the last piece that has a physical puppet in it, just a heads up. I will not be offended if you leave. But also like exposure therapy, I don't know. Who would like to hear a folktale? It's so convenient, I have one right here. Can everyone hear me in the back, by the way, like without the mic?
Yes.
Yes, my theater background's paying off. I was raised as a touring professional child clown, but that is a story for another time. That's true, that's not a joke. The truth of it is my father is a clown and my mother is a therapist. Here I am today. All right, to the puppets. Have you heard the story of Baba Yaga and her two daughters? No? Well, she made them out of teeth. Listen. In the shtetl Gerenkrovka is a woman named Baba Yaga, and she lives in a house on chicken legs. All autumn, Baba Yaga watches the Goyish and neighbor girls playing in the creek bed. She studies the way they hold earthworms between thumb and forefinger, very gently, so as not to crush them. She studies the odd proportions of a girl, the way a girl's hair darkens when wet with stream water, the bright hunger in a girl's eyes. She takes careful notes in a catskin notebook. She cultivates a longing that roots in her own body, sturdy as an apple tree. That longing, it's so sticky and so thick that it replaces the crone's need for water,
for food. She teases out this loneliness and she stirs it up in a wooden bowl with flour and honey and butter. She rolls out the dough. This dough she curls into little twists. And she bakes those twists into rubble. The following morning, Baba Yaga approaches the neighbor girls who'd been playing in the creek, and she offers them these pastries that she made. The girls accept them eagerly. But when the girls bite into the treats, that loneliness is so sticky that the syrup catches in their teeth and will not come free. They gnaw, and they tug, and they grind their jaws, but nothing will loosen them. Then, Baba Yaga reaches forward, takes hold of the rugelach lodged in each girl's mouth, and yanks, pop, out come 2 teeth, one from each of the 2 young girls. Baba Yaga scurries home as quickly as she can. She wraps each tooth in wool, and into each bundle she places a sprig of rosemary, a copper kopeck, and a droplet of blood pricked from her own finger. When night falls, she holds a bundle to each breast, and she nurses them. By morning, Baba Yaga has 2 young daughters. Her eldest daughter, Ela, is very smart and, well, very cruel. And Baba Yaga loves her more than life. Her youngest, Malka, is only an infant, and she weeps all day, and she weeps all night, and Baba Yaga loves her more than the moon, more than death, more than she could ever speak aloud in mortal words. One evening, a soothsayer comes to my door and he tells Baba Yaga that one of her daughters will not live to see womanhood. And so, Baba Yaga slits the soothsayer's throat and she cooks him in a big iron pot on the wood-burning stove, and that night, Baba Yaga and her daughters have a great feast. The crone and her children nestle together, wrapping themselves in sheepskin, and they sleep. For a while, they are happy.
So I have one more piece to share for you all tonight, and then we'll sort of slip into a brief Q&A before we'll all be outside signing books. And yeah, thank you so much to the Salem Literary Festival for bringing us out here. This is so lovely. Thank you to all of you for coming out and joining us tonight. I do want to acknowledge my collaborators who worked on this puppet show with me. I've been touring this show for for exactly a year as of this week. This is my 60-something thing with this puppet show. I've gone insane. Puppets run my life. I've been flying twice a week for a year now with a 50-pound crate of puppets in tow. And so the box that you see here, how many of you have ever seen a cranky before? That's what this contraption is called, where you turn a crank and there's this, well, for those who are new, it's so cool, right? So the cranky box here that was created by a retired cabinet maker named Gilbert Ruff. He lives off in the woods in an old hippie commune in rural Vermont, which I know is how everyone thinks we live in rural Vermont, but it's not. It is for Gilbert, though. And Gilbert, he wears overalls every day. He's an old man, wears overalls every day. He did come to my book launch, and he did dress up very nice, by which I mean he wore a fancy suit jacket over his overalls. So thank you, Gilbert, for that box. The blue patterning on the box, as well as the amazing scroll that you just saw and the scroll you're about to see, is by an incredible artist named Maria Pugnetti. Her artist moniker is Woolly Mar, woolly like the sheep, M-A-R. She is on Instagram and on the internet if you want to follow her various pursuits. Amazing multimedia artist. Also, great DJ. Also, my roommate. You really can have it all, folks. And then lastly, the pieces were directed by, and the handheld puppet you're about to see was built by my friend Shoshana Bass of Sandglass Theater, which is an amazing Jewish-German puppetry theater in Guilford, Vermont. Actually, in Putney, Vermont. If you want something really rockin' to do this weekend, in Brattleboro, Vermont, where I'm from, it's a puppet festival all weekend long. Jenna, stay out of Brattleboro this week. Sandglass is putting on an amazing puppet festival outside, so you wander through a field and there's different puppet shows around. Shoshana has kind of my favorite unofficial title of a person ever, which is that she's the heiress to a puppet empire. Her parents are puppeteers. They founded this amazing theater, and actually, if you read Thistlefoot, the show that Isaac and Valentine put on, called The Drowning Fool, the puppets in The Drowning Fool are inspired by puppets in a Sandglass Theater production that Shoshana's father had made back in the 80s called The Autumn Portraits. And so when it came time to design a puppet show for the book, I had Shoshana do it as this sort of full circle thing, and she knocked it out of the park. So, those are my amazing friends. I, however, made the legs on the table. So, thank you. I appreciate that solidarity. Without further ado, I do have this one last piece. I want to say this piece does include some violent imagery. I know you're oh no, puppet violence. But the pogroms were a very dark time in our history, and so just wanted to put that out there. There is some violent imagery, so take care of yourself if that is something.
Worse than eating the soothsayer.
What?
Worse than eating the soothsayer.
It is worse than eating a soothsayer. But, you'll survive probably. So, thank you all again for coming out. There's nothing worse, in my humble opinion, than being trapped in a Q&A you didn't want to be a part of. So after this piece is finished, I'm going to hide behind that curtain for 15 seconds if you want to make a break for it without feeling weird. And then I'll come back out and answer questions. I like to afford people the small gifts that other performers never afford me as an audience member, so, In April
A boy delivering newspapers discovers hidden weaponry and communist pamphlets in Haim the stonecutter's studio. In May, Pogromщики hang Haim from the tree behind his workshop. It is an old apple tree, and it has not borne fruit for many years. Today is different. When the soldiers leave, Haim's sister's boy tries to cut him down, but the rope won't sever. With each drag of a blade, the rope hardens. First into leather, then into steel cable, then into a gleaming diamond chain that snaps every blade from its handle. There can be no mourner's cottage, no burial. After 7 chivalrous days, and 7 chivalrous nights, only a skeleton remains. Everyone avoids Haim the stonecutter's studio after that, and the terrible tree, and the terrible rope, and the terrible shape dangling from it. Everyone, that is, except for Baba Yaga. Good morning, Reb Skeleton. Good morning, Baba Yaga. Sometimes Baba Yaga's daughters, Ela and Malka, accompanied her on her visits. Ela enjoyed placing hollyhocks between the skeleton's toes. One day, Reb Skeleton asks Baba Yaga for a favor. Baba Yaga! I have been hanging in this tree for 60 days and nights, and I have grown tired of the view. My neck, it is sore at this angle, and I wish to see the world. Won't you be so kind as to cut me down? But, Reb Skeleton, everyone knows that you hang on an unbreakable rope. Why would you ask me such a thing? Are your daughters not born from teeth? Does your house not walk on chicken's legs? If anyone can break the unbreakable rope, it is you. Plus, if you agree to free me, I will do any 3 tasks you ask of me. I swear it. Now this, Baba Yaga likes the sound of very much. Very well. I will cut you down. But let me tell you your first task. It is my daughter's birthday soon. You will paint a mural over the front door of our home, honoring my littlest daughter, who is small as a hare, my eldest daughter, who is cruel as a crow, and myself. Do you agree to this? Or shall I leave you here so the birds may build nests in your ribs? Reb Skeleton agreed. And so, that night, Baba Yaga returned with a long pair of scissors. The blades were glossy as snow. The grips encircled with barbed wire so no one but Baba Yaga could bear to hold them. Snip! She cut Reb Skeleton free from the noose, easy as that. By morning, a beautiful mural hovered over my front door. The following day, Baba Yaga found Reb Skeleton again. Reb Skeleton, death looks well on you, I see. But you are not free yet. You still have 2 tasks you must do for me.
I remember, Baba Yaga. What will you have me do tonight?
Tonight, my eldest. She has been having a dream and playing a game called the Orchard, in which she is dangling from an apple tree, and all the apples are sweet and ripe, and she is hungry, but she cannot eat them, for she is dead. Neither of my daughters have slept the night through since the pogromshiki strung you up. You will paint a new mural for them, one upon the ceiling to help them sleep, in which the soldiers are ruined, and my daughters are happy.
Very well, but you may tell your daughters that when you are dead, you do not want apples, nor matzah, nor honey. You only want to be left dead.
Still, by morning, a beautiful, terrible mural extends across my ceiling.
Baba Yaga! Tonight, I will do my final task for you, and then I will be free. Tell me, what can I do for you tonight?
Tonight, Baba Yaga gives Reb Skeleton the scissors she had used to cut him down. Tonight, you will slit the throat of every soldier in the White Army, and every Cossack, and every pogromshiki peasant who would take up the torch. And when that is done, you will return home, and you will kill each of the men who killed you.
But, Baba Yaga, this will take a century. How am I to know freedom?
Good. Hi, bringer of death. You are freedom.
Thank you.